All right, so this is our interview with Eric Sherman, who is an absolute wealth of information about the industry, and you've written a few tomes, on directing, on producing, and you also, as a professional, teach at Pasadena Arts Center, and they have an incredible background there, yeah. And tell us about yourself, Eric.
I was born in the film business.
Yeah.
My dad was a director, and in fact, he was the last surviving director of what's now called the Golden Age.
Yeah.
He just passed away a year ago at the age of 99 and 11 months. Powerful, strong, healthy the entire time. So I was born into the kind of studio environment. I went off to college in the what we now call the high 60s as a math major, obviously.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was dragged kicking and screaming into film. At that time, film wasn't studied.
Yeah.
It was beneath contempt to study it. So we would beg, borrow, and parentheses, steal, close parentheses, cameras on weekends and just fool around. And we made a 2.5-hour feature, which was shown at Cannes and New York Film Festival, and we didn't know any better.
Yeah.
So we made every mistake you can make. And then my third year in college, I applied for a program called Scholar of the House in Film. La-di-da. And I made a film. It was a jazz documentary, naturally, directly related to math.
Yeah. Yeah, it is actually jazz.
And I produced it, directed it, shot it, edited it, did the sound. I looked like a one-man band with all those things hanging on me. And that showed in the New York Film Festival, and Variety reviewed it as, quote, perhaps the best documentary ever made on a jazz musician.
Wow.
Then, in my last year, I wrote a book, which is this book called The Director's Event.
Right.
It's the first book written in English about American film directors,
Wow.
1967.
Wow.
Because at that time, the only people seriously interested in American film were in France, Italy, Germany.
Wow, yeah.
And I interviewed these guys. So I got out of college. I had a degree, Scholar of the House in Film, a book, 2 films, and I thought my phone would ring. So I came back to LA and my phone didn't ring. What I didn't know was that the industry was undergoing the transition from the major studio dominated into entrepreneurial films.
This was during Robert Evans' reign at Paramount across the street over here.
Yeah.
And Chinatown and all that at that point.
The film we usually say marked the transition was Easy Rider.
Oh, yeah.
Independently financed, independently produced, directed, and released. So my background was studio because of my dad, but my experience was independent.
Great.
Raise the money and shoot.
Yeah.
I then finally went to my dad and said, Dad, how do you do it?
Yeah.
Because my phone just wasn't ringing. And he said, I'll set you up a meeting. I went over to Paramount actually to have a meeting with Howard Koch. There were 2 Howard Koches. One was a writer and one was a producer. And I met with the producer, and he said, you have good bloodlines. He raised thoroughbred horses.
Nice. Nice.
Good bloodlines. What do you want? And I said, well, I want to direct. And he said, what do you want to direct? And see, my dad was walked a script by Jack Warner 3 times a year. Here's your next project.
Wow.
Koch said, what do you want to direct? And I said, I thought you were going to tell me that.
Yeah.
And that's when I had the blinding awareness that the business had changed. So then right around that time, I was wondering how was I going to find material, and I wrote 6 scripts, one of which was purchased, but it wasn't made. At that time, I was asked by the American Film Institute to write the official book on directing, and that was this thing called Directing the Film.
And this is the ultimate tome, correct?
Yeah, this is still in print. It's had 18 printings.
Wow.
It's been published in Mandarin, Korean, Japanese. It's the standard textbook on directing.
Wow.
And what I want to tell you is this. I was assigned, Little Brown and Company was the publisher, and they had assigned a journalist from Boston to come interview directors and find out how you do it.
Yeah.
The journalist literally had a nervous breakdown. because nobody agreed. The AFI, American Film Institute, called me because I had done 3 book-length interviews for them, one with my dad, one with the other Howard Koch, the writer,
Okay.
and one with Abe Polanski. And they said, Eric, we need a hand. You can write, you're in the business, people will trust you. We need you to interview all these directors and write the official book, and you got 6 months. This is before word processors existed.
Right. Typewriter City.
So I interviewed 85 directors, male, female, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, documentary, animation, narrative, TV, experimental, foreign, American, I don't know if I said that, sound era, silent era, in other words, a complete
Wow.
cross-section.
Wow.
10,000 pages, which I typed every one of them myself. And it was the ultimate cut and paste. My house was covered with little slips of paper because
Yeah.
no word processors existed. Then I had my second blinding realization about the film business. The first was that it had become, instead of mogul-dominated, it was now entrepreneur.
Right.
Second blinding realization was nobody agreed on how to direct.
Wow.
And therefore, I had to find another theme to wind through the book, and that was that everybody agreed on what the problems were that they had to solve. So this book, and I think the reason it has lived, I didn't set out to write a classic, God knows, but the reason it exists is it is a list of every problem faced by a director.
Wow.
And
Huge.
the editing concept of the book is, let's say the problem of actors. The question is, should you rehearse them? 1/3 of all the directors say, yes, of course you rehearse. 1/3 of all the directors say, of course not, you don't rehearse.
Right.
And 1/3 say, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't.
Right.
So I would pick the extreme answers and listen. Then on the question of cinematography, should a director tell the cameraman or woman where to put the lens and what lens to use? 1/3 say, of course you do.
Yeah.
1/3 say, of course you don't. 1/3 say, well, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. So this book is a list of those problems encountered by directors. Next, I was asked by some studio heads, whom I shall not name, to train first-time directors.
Wow.
And you might say, well, how could a man or woman get in a position to direct without knowing how to?
They wrote it?
They wrote the script,
Yep.
exactly, Kate, and they attached themselves to it to direct, and then they say, now what? And the studio would say, well, we thought you knew.
Wow.
And I became the guy that they would go to, and I have a number of clients whom you would know
Yeah.
who got trained by me in the basement at
Brilliant.
midnight
No
at
kidding.
the studio.
Wow.
And it was great fun, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
On my website, you can find out who some
Yeah.
of them are.
It's great. I want to be one of them.
Yeah, you got it, my friend.
That's where I'm headed.